Welcome back, AI curious folk, to AI Ramblings podcast number 111. I'm Michael Parekh, your human AI guide, and today is a special day, of course, the day before the 250th birthday of these amazing United States. I have a lot to talk about today, given the end of the week. I know it feels like it shouldn't be, but there is a lot to go through, especially if you're framing around some very important things that are going on that have big consequences for the AI tech wave going into the rest of this year and far beyond. Let's get into it. Today's theme is that the industry is very much in the middle of defining the other in the fast developing us versus them enterprise AI market narrative. Enterprise software companies, large and small, are aligning themselves against the frontier model companies. I'm talking about, of course, Anthropic and OpenAI in particular, especially ahead of their mega AI IPOs, each $1 trillion or more. Now, especially what I want to talk about today are Microsoft and Palantir. They had events in the last few days, Palantir yesterday, that we need to unpack. And both companies and their founders are very much in this game of defining themselves in this us versus them dynamic, which I think is important to understand as we assess how to think about the whole AI infrastructure boom that's going on. Each of these companies spending 150 billion or more, trillions of dollars really over the next 2 or 3 years, and how enterprises, which is the biggest market, that's where all the money is, the banks are, as they say, and how those enterprises are thinking and scratching their heads about who to work with, who not to work with, and so on. And the arguments are being made back and forth here pretty aggressively. So that's what I'd like to talk about. As usual, I'll walk through 3 specific events in the last few days this week, and then my takes and the broader overall take. First up, Palantir's founder and CEO, Alex Karp, had a very entertaining 20-minute CNBC interview on Squawk Box yesterday with Andrew Ross Sorkin and the rest of the team. It's worth watching for entertainment purposes alone. If you have time, I'll have links, of course, in the show notes. And it basically builds on sharply on what Microsoft's Satya Nadella already started to do with an essay, which I wrote about separately. I'll have a link to that as well earlier this week, where he was rebalancing and positioning himself versus enterprise customers and OpenAI and Anthropic. But let's talk about what Alex did. It needs every campaign, whether it's political or business, needs a crisp definition of the other. You need a cogent us versus them narrative. This has been the playbook for thousands of years. And this week, both Microsoft and Palantir did their own versions of this, and that's what's important to talk about. So Nadella came at it a few days ago as the incumbent-insider. Remember, he's got a leg in every one of the camps. OpenAI is one of the biggest investors and partners. His Microsoft stake there alone is worth at least a couple of $100 billion, as and when OpenAI goes public at $1 trillion or more. But at the same time, in his essay, he basically used words like, we can't let AI giants eat the economy, specific words. And basically, he is a partner of OpenAI hedging from within the tent, basically, having both sides of the argument, trying to reposition Microsoft as the enterprise's trusted broker while still owning a multi-$100 billion stake in OpenAI that's worth a lot, including all access to OpenAI IP for the next 5 years, based on some thresholds. I've written a lot about that too. And Karp is the outsider. He's the warrior. He was very combative on this YouTube video. And again, the links in the show notes with Squawk Box. And he went on about how the enterprises in private are telling him how much they don't like dealing with OpenAI and Anthropic, because those companies are basically hoovering up all of their data and their IP and essentially building applications that will compete with their core businesses down the road. And he had a 9-point AI sovereignty manifesto that he talked about. And he had dropped that already the days before on X and Twitter. So he talked a little bit about that. Then he Basically, if you listen to his words, he said enterprises want to, quote, own the means of production. Those are Karl Marx vocabulary terms, ideology grade rhetoric, not product marketing. And he is casting enterprise customers as the proletariat against the frontier lab landlords. Statements, and he's basically saying things that these are the other, and I, Palantir, with my amazing AI application software, is going to help protect all the enterprises in America and the world against those bad guys. Classic us versus them narrative. It done very well. It was tremendous performative theater. And the media, of course, on Squawk Box ate it up. Again, needs to be watched. It was followed on by former AI czar David Sachs, who's also a VC. He just left his post with the White House. He jumped in on Twitter basically saying that we cannot have the frontier lab companies hoovering up the proprietary knowledge and turn it into their next product. So why now? Why is all this going on now? Because Anthropic and OpenAI are racing to hoover up, from their perspective, over $100 billion in revenue from enterprises just in the last 6 months or so alone. Anthropic has gone from nowhere, having no AI coding runaway success in their Claude Code and then Claude Cowork on top of it, to over $50 billion in revenue this month on an ARR basis. And OpenAI is not too far behind. So the traditional enterprise software companies like Microsoft, Palantir, Salesforce are all startled by this, and they're like, we need to slow these guys down. That's a normal competitive response. And it's and so they're trying to draw this battle lines in terms of us versus them. And Palantir is positioning themselves as the guardian against the data hoovering aspect. And yes, I recognize that the irony here. This is the same Palantir that is working very closely with almost every part of the U.S. government, military and otherwise, the intelligence agencies, whatever, employing their software beyond NRA grade technologies to, quote, hoover up horizontal and vertical information across every domestic foreign sets of populations. And that has, been documented. So this is the game within a game that's being played. And I wanted to just highlight that in terms of the first event to talk about and my take of that. The second event yesterday was the reason Karp was on TV in the first place is that NVIDIA and Palantir had announced an enterprise AI deal. And this was a shrewd deal on part of NVIDIA, and the founder, CEO there, Jensen Huang, I've written a lot about him as well. And notice the pattern. Jensen is partnering closely with almost everyone in the enterprise, frenemies, competitors, partners, everyone. And Palantir here this is a very shrewd move. He's also done similar deals with Microsoft's Satya Nadella, Amazon's Andy Jassy, Google's Sundar Pichai, Oracle's Ellison, and many, many others. Meta's Mark Zuckerberg and Elon, of course, are also close Jensen partners. He's physically delivered the latest and greatest chips at various points to each of these CEOs, been at their keynote conferences, and so on and so forth. Each time he shows up, he gets a few $1 billion in orders from the same companies. And that's the dynamic. And here, Jensen did the same thing with Palantir, and that's what they were on TV, or Palantir was to talk about. And the deal is important, especially because it's just another major distribution mechanism for Nemotron. I've talked a lot about that. This is NVIDIA's open source hardware software model infrastructure. And it's one of the reasons why I wrote extensively about how NVIDIA is potentially one of the two leading companies that could lead open source software in the United States versus China, along with Apple, that's coming at it from a different perspective. But NVIDIA's Nemotron is a key component of this thing. Again, details in a lot of the write-ups I've done. And that's what he was talking about, partnering with Palantir and Karp in terms of distribution to Palantir's customers. So that's the important dynamic to note there. And it's an important playbook that Jensen is playing, and he is not playing the us versus them. He has been extraordinarily the diplomat, not just within all of these combatants in the United States, but obviously at a much higher level in terms of the US versus China, with upcoming President Xi of China coming to the United States in September. Remember, President Trump picked Jensen up in Alaska in Air Force One on his way to China the last time around. So Jensen is basically working with all of the about very brilliant. Machiavelli would be proud in terms of how he's done this. So that's item number two that I wanted to touch on. The third thing is, let's look at the state of the market in terms of what enterprises are actually doing and feeling and thinking about all these AI and who they like and don't like. And in that context, a trade research firm, Semi-Analysis, did an excellent report, which I'll again have in the links, where they went to enterprise customers, most of them who are their customers, basically asking about how enterprises are thinking about using AI token maxing versus token budgeting, deploying AI tokens to their employees at scale. And they have some important takeaways, which is that both token maxing and token budgeting is going on, but it's early days. And the numbers basically still indicate that the companies are trying everything. They're working with the frontier model companies. They're working with open source software. They're working with other multiple models together. So still very early in terms of deciding these things. And yes, the market is moving toward more a la carte pricing, away from more subscription tiers, the $20 a month, $200 a month type of pricing for the top models, only for a little bit, because all the two frontier model companies that I wrote about yesterday really want everyone to move to a la carte pricing, even as they bring back down the compute costs themselves. So there's a lot of detail, a lot of data here that I would highlight. And the broader picture here is that the software tools for the AI companies and their enterprise customers still need a lot more work. They need to be built up to manage the AI spend, monitor who's spending what, do the budgeting, etc. All of that infrastructure is still being built. And so we're in the early days of that at the moment. But the Semi-Analysis report is important to take a look at. My overall take on all of these three events and this whole us versus them narrative is that these are the early days. The guns have gone off in the enterprise campaign for trillions of AI dollars in terms of how businesses spend, basically re-architecting their existing software that they've used for the last 50, 60 years with all this AI stuff. That's not going to happen in a few quarters. That's going to take several years, probably decades to do, just like client server, mainframe to mini computer transition, mini computer to PC. All of those things took 10, 20 years. We're going to see all of that happen faster, but it's still not going to be quarters fast. It's going to be years fast, half a decade, that sort of thing. And in the meantime, us versus them narratives are not new. We've seen this in every tech wave. It's just larger. The zeros are bigger. The competition's bigger. And you've got all the companies, whether it's Satya Nadella at Microsoft, Alex Karp, Palantir, they're doing what they should do. It's what humans have done in political campaigns and battles for, again, thousands of years, whether it's in politics, in business, in personal lives. It's the same game, same playbook. And that's what's running here. And particularly note the timing of what's going on in these events I just talked about today. The Microsoft Palantir campaigns were launched the very week that Anthropic and OpenAI are still gated by the US government in Blip 2.0, what I call Blip 2.0, the whole stopping of distributing their latest models and now slowly releasing them a little bit 3 weeks later. And this is while those companies are trying to figure out how to move from subscription pricing to a la carte pricing. It's while they're ramping up their own mega AI IPOs, and all of that is being slowed down by all of this. And so in as much as Satya and Alex are trying to play us versus them politics, this is a good time to kind of lob those rocks over the fence, as it were. And especially as the government itself is playing traffic cop on all of this, and companies like Palantir are very close to the government, obviously. They provide a lot of the AI and other software to allow many parts of the governments to do the things they want to do, regardless of what they're allowed to do or not should do. Those are debates for other forums at other times. So that is the dynamic here on of this. Again, we've seen this movie before. In prior tech waves, we saw this in terms of IBM's efforts against the mini computer and PC companies. Apple's 1984 ad, as an example, Super Bowl, decades ago, basically campaigning as IBM as the Orwellian entity versus the freedom-loving Apple computer. These are the classic examples of this old versus us versus them playbook. Steve Ballmer, number 2 at Microsoft for years and one of the richest men in the world, called open source Linux a cancer, decades ago. And now Microsoft is one of the biggest supporters of open source today. Irony. Microsoft versus Netscape in terms of the browser wars, same kind of battle. So we've seen this sort of thing before. It's just happening this time. It feels dramatic when it's on CNBC and it's very entertaining, etc. But just recognize that this is a remake of the same movie. So highlight on all of that just to underline it and make it clear as we watch this on our TVs, read about it in our blogs, podcasts, etc. Let's now move to the Gadget AI section today. Here I want to talk about Microsoft being the latest of a number of companies that are trying to bridge consumer AI apps with enterprise apps. And here they're trying to do that with their Copilot app that is prevalent in the enterprise space across Windows and Office and all of that. They've got over 20 million people using Copilot in business, and maybe another 10 or so on the consumer side, 30 million compared to tens of millions or hundreds of millions for companies like ChatGPT. And OpenAI, of course, is trying to fuse ChatGPT with their coding software, Codex, to create a super app capability that you can talk to, etc. And then I've talked about this as well, you've got Apple with Siri AI that's coming out this fall in September that basically takes your data in the personal repositories of your iPhone, secure, and basically leverages that to provide you very personalized AI that's trained on your data, indexed on your data. And so this is something that we're going to see across all our gadgets through all of these apps, whether it's from Microsoft, it's ChatGPT, whether it's Google, of course, Gemini, across all of their applications that each serve billion people, Gmail, Docs, Photos, YouTube, etc. And so this is, again, another playbook that is being run, and Microsoft is the most recent one with Copilot. There was a very detailed article on this, which I will have in the show notes. I just wanted to highlight that, which takes us to the Q&A section of today. But the first one, I'm just building off on what I've been talking about, again, a question, what is my daily AI app of choice on the smartphone? And here, I've said this before, I continue to work daily with the Google Gemini and Perplexity have been my 2 apps of choice. I'm also using Siri AI more in the developer beta phase, but it's very raw and early. I'm liking it so far. Second question related to this, it's what's the number one feature that I would like that they don't have yet? And here, as much as all of these apps are trying to leverage all the data across the system, they still have a lot of wood to chop, especially Google Gemini, which I think has the most potential. But it's surprising that Google Gemini still doesn't integrate as well to, let's say, my Google Docs or Google Photos, being able to leverage the data that's in all of these apps and provide me better answers. I know they're working hard on it. It's just not there. It gets very frustrating when your expectation set is for regular software used to be in quarters and years, and now we're expecting these changes and features in days, and that's been one of the optical things that's a problem for all these companies. So that's my frustration, but it'll get lifted soon. So that is the essence of what I want to talk about. And today's our Reset to Zero post, 1136, I just wanted to highlight, since we talked about NVIDIA before, they're expanding their revenue share agreements with a number of their partners, basically using their balance sheet to provide compute and infrastructure, GPUs, to a lot of companies in exchange for a piece of their revenues. These are more of these very win-win circular deals, if you want to call them, but they're doing the same kinds of strategies that their customers and frenemy competitors are doing as well, but they just have a bigger balance sheet to leverage that with, and that's what they're doing. And there's a lot of interesting detail that I want you to look at if you have an interest in this part of what's going on. Okay, tomorrow, of course, is the big 250th birthday of our United States. I wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk about this a little bit because just personal thoughts. So bear with me; it won't take too long. It means a lot to me personally that we're at this 250th birthday. I've been waiting for this for a long time. I'm a first-generation American. It's important to remember now more than ever that Americans have historically been more united than they have seemed to be at almost every point in the extraordinary, tumultuous history of the country over the 250 years, through the lows and the highs, with more in common than it has always seemed on the surface. And I've seen this up close and personal as a first generation American, proud American, since I landed at Auburn University in Alabama in 1977 when I was 17 years old. Now, I just want to take a jump off that year, 1977, almost 50 years ago, 49 years ago. This is the same year that the U.S., since we're so crazy about space and Artemis and what Elon is doing with space, 77 was one of the most remarkable years for the U.S. space program. Most of us have forgotten it. It was the year that U.S. and NASA launched not one, but two interplanetary space probes, Voyager 1 and 2. I'm a huge freak on both of these probes. They were just designed to spin around the further away planets before the planet that used to be called Pluto and take a bunch of pictures. And they did that amazing. But then the designers secretly planned for them to do more without the budget to do it. Recognize that these two probes have less computing power than the key fob in your pocket for your car. But they managed to design these things to the point where today, Voyager 1 is over 15 billion miles away. Voyager 2 is about 13 plus billion miles away. These are the furthest out human-created objects on planet in our history, 250 years or otherwise. And it was this young country that managed to put these things out there. Both of them are running out of their nuclear power in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, so that they'll basically go dark, and then they'll be floating around in space for millions of years. If you want to watch a very fun movie this weekend on on the Voyager, then what I would recommend Star Trek, the first 1979 movie, which is no spoilers. It's about Voyager, but it's one of my favorite movies. And one of my favorite authors in terms of space is Carl Sagan, the famous Carl Sagan. And he and his wife created these golden records that are basically on the Voyager spacecraft. And these are the two golden records. They're basically a mixtape, a bottle. It basically has everything that the humans on Earth are about: our music, our language, our world, our animals, etc. There are two of these things on each of the Voyagers, and they're floating around on space since 1977. The reason I'm focused on all of this is that these probes were launched by a country that is a united melting pot culture, punching way above its chronological age. A country that was barely 200 years old when these things went up, and now it'll be 250 years old. And we've been inspired from science fiction to build all the stuff, everything from Google to what we're doing with AI and robots and so on, because what we watched in Star Trek and Star Wars and Isaac Asimov's I, Robot, which is fueling our ambitions to humanoid robots, etc. And it's inspired the world as well. Not that the world doesn't have amazing science fiction. Three-Body Problem from China is case point in one. But I just say we are very early on our own journey of a federation of states, the 13 colonies that gave us these United States of 50 states, federation of nations, federation of people, whether it's EU, Brexit, all of those things, ups and downs. And the country now barely 250 years old, with a lot of help from friends and allies and cultures around the world. The two probes to me are a key point in the technology race that's underway still today. And one thing that's very important to understand about the space race, because we cast the US-China AI race as the US-Soviet or US-USSR, US-Russia space race that started with Sputnik in 1957 and ran until the 12th the last one, US astronaut landed on the moon in 72. And then we all forgot about going to the moon. We only now want to go back to the moon and land people on the moon again with Artemis 4 and 5, etc. Because China wants to do it as well. So we want a space race again. Politically, it's great. That's the way to get money for these ventures because there's no economic return otherwise. But what's important is that there is a history of US and Russia in particular since 1975 that most of us have forgotten, that US and Russia in 1975 had the first Soyuz Apollo missions where they shook hands in space. And since then, for decades after that, the It led to cooperation between these two countries that were in a Cold War prior to that. It led to the shuttle mirror missions. It led to the International Space Station that both countries have basically run for over 25 years, over $200 billion of in joint investments over decades. The Americans and Russians have done so much in space together than we have done separately. Obviously, the things that gets the headline is the competition. And competition, the us versus them narrative, which I talked about earlier, is what makes money flywheels move in terms of getting money for this and that, etc. But it's very important to understand that things get built more together more than they do when they're apart. And I wanted to highlight that on this 250th anniversary of our country. I hope I didn't belabor the point, but I wanted to just talk a little bit about that. So I appreciate you giving me time. In the meantime, I'm celebrating, of course, the birthday of these United States. I want to wish you all a terrific July 4th weekend. Let's wish the USA the very best for the next 250 years together, with a lot more working with a lot of countries and people around the world. Thanks for joining us today, AI Curious Folk. Stay tuned.